Silicon Valley. Please give a warm welcome to Dave McClure, the founder of the famous 500 Startups. Great, thanks, man. So, Dave, I remember that 2 years ago, you were here with me on stage. At that time, you had just started your own startup called 500 Startups.
Yeah, we're called Startup Zero, I guess.
Nobody knew about this company. You were considering over lunch to do your first investment in China, and and now over the past few months or so, it's Dave McClure everywhere, 500 Startups everywhere, becoming a global brand. So
I have a lot of clones in China, I think.
I don't know. I mean, it's not only China, it's Brazil, it's Europe. I mean, so how do you explain such a global success? And could you maybe elaborate on this concept of lean startup that you've been able to get popular?
Well, I don't think we're successful yet. We're just prolific. We'll see in the next 5 years whether we're successful. Our basic strategy is that we write a lot of little checks. So it's actually quite easy to be prolific as long as you work hard. We probably make investments initially at around $50,000 to $100,000. We've made, I believe, about 300 investments in the last 2 years. So we're probably about 60% of the way to our name, but we're not planning to stop at that point. Lean startup is maybe different from my perspective as an investor, but the philosophy is similar. So from a startup company's perspective, I think lean startup is often misinterpreted as being cheap and thrifty, and while those are admirable attributes for startups, that's not really what lean startup is all about. Lean startup is really about quick cycle time, learning what the customer is actually sort of interested in, and trying to build a feedback loop around product and marketing. So not the typical waterfall approach and specs and requirements and get something out to market and then find out that you've made something that people don't want, but trying on a very limited budget, more limited cycle time and resources than budget per se, getting feedback from the customer as quickly as possible, and then using an iterative cycle to kind of zero in more on what the customer wants. So from an investment perspective, what I think we're trying to do is understand whether entrepreneurs can be successful in product development, customer acquisition, and monetization, probably in those sets of stages with our investments. So we kind of think product, market, revenue as the kind of staging that we're going through and de-risking the investment. And when we initially make an investment, we do a quick evaluation of the startup and the entrepreneur and the product. But we know we're going to be wrong a lot. We'll probably be wrong, 60 to 80% of the time in just whether they can be successful at the next round of funding. But hopefully about 20 to 30% of our initial investments we're likely to follow on, and maybe in the long run, 5 to 20% of those will be successful. But we're trying to apply a quantitative approach to venture. And our belief is that out of any given fund, maybe 200 to 250 investments will yield 50 potential follow-on investments, maybe 10 large wins in the long run.
Why is this concept of lean startup becoming so popular these days?
Hopefully because it works. Well, I think also because previous startups and venture investors have been so disastrously unsuccessful. While there are definitely the success stories, such as Facebook and Twitter and others, and large e-commerce stories and very successful venture firms, the fact of the matter is most things fail, most startups fail, most venture investors suck, and their returns suck terribly over the last 10 years. The asset class has particularly performed very poorly in the last 10 to 15 years. Some of that is because there was just an excess of capital going into the market starting in the late 90s and early 2000s, but I also think a lot of it was just a really wrong direction. When startups were generally requiring less capital and getting more efficient, venture firms were growing and adding more capital and pushing more money into startups. You had startup requirements going this way and venture investing going this way. And I just think that's a recipe for disaster. So we've been trying to match, an investment philosophy that's really more in tune with what's going on in the market, which is less capital requirements for building products, more efficient customer acquisition, and still a recognition that failure is common. So not making a lot of small investments, but not putting a lot of money to work until after companies have started to de-risk product and prove that they're actually getting some traction.
This morning, we had a conversation with your friend, Naval Ravikant, and actually he was talking about one of
the most brilliant people in Silicon Valley right now.
Definitely, and he was saying the same about you too.
We paid each other to say
yeah,
that.
Probably. I would. I would think there's some kind of a clear understanding and actually working partnership between you guys. Yeah. But so he was talking about one of your portfolio companies. You know which one?
I'm not sure which one.
Twilio.
His portfolio company, yeah, Twitter.
Oh, no, not Twitter. Twilio.
Oh, Twilio, yes.
Twilio. So sorry, my terrible French accent sometimes is taking over. So can you highlight a little bit some of the most promising companies of your portfolio?
Sure. So probably Twilio, Wildfire, and SendGrid are probably three of our more successful companies. These are actually investments that I made when I was still working at Founders Fund and running the Facebook Fund. Twilio is a platform for voice and SMS that allows developers and enterprise companies to build applications that involve voice and SMS solutions. They provide telephone numbers on a pay-as-you-go basis. So it allows the previously trillion-dollar telecom business to maybe be moved down to only a reasonably $10 to $100 billion telecom business.
That's not bad.
But way more efficient ways to implement voice and SMS applications, and kind of like an Amazon style web service offering. Wildfire is a company, Wildfire Interactive, that's doing social media marketing campaigns for both large and small businesses. That company started out of the Facebook Fund program that I was running 3 years ago with Excel and Founders Fund. They started out as about 5 people 3-4 years ago and are now over 300 people. Profitable. They're used by most large agencies and advertising companies in the US and actually outside the US as well, including being used by Facebook. In fact, I think 2 of Mark Zuckerberg's sisters actually work there as well. And then SendGrid is a company that's doing email deliverability solutions. I think they're sending on the order of several billion emails a month and helping make sure that companies get their email delivered through messaging and information networks, or where they're caught in spam filters to identify them for companies and how they can improve or reduce that spam. But I mean, we're small investors in most of those companies. Hopefully, we're early investors in a lot of those companies. And again, so a lot of what we're doing is really attacking the market through a quantitative approach to investing, assuming a high fail rate but a large sample size, and then doubling down after we're seeing some success. I kind of like to call it Moneyball for startups, if you will.
Yeah, I don't know how successful Moneyball as a movie in China has been, but yes, a pretty interesting movie.
Hopefully, Brad Pitt makes it sexy. I don't know. Analytics around baseball aren't always that sexy.
Yeah, but it was pretty interesting in terms for an entrepreneur, definitely. So well, actually, taking small stakes in startups sometimes can prove to be a great choice. I mean, Eduardo,
depends on if we have a good filter or not for that. Yeah.
Eduardo Savarin will be our guest tomorrow morning, and his first investment in Facebook was $1,000, if I'm not mistaken. So. Turned out to be not so bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Facebook and Twitter are the popular stories to talk about in the US, but that's not so much really the trend that we're investing in. I would say to use the baseball analogy again, we're more like Ichiro than we are Barry Bonds or Albert Pujols. So we're not trying to be home run hitters. We're trying to be consistent singles and doubles hitters. Maybe occasionally we get a home run. I like to think we have the black swan option because we're doing a lot of investments, but in general, we're trying to find investments at valuations between 1 to 5 million that have 20 to 50x potential, and we hope we're right somewhere between 5 to 10% of the time. Hopefully if that model works out, then we're in the range of making 2 to 3x for the fund overall. Maybe if we're smart on the second and third check, we might be able to get that a little bit higher. But we're probably not looking for the next Facebook. We might be looking for the next Mint.com or SlideShare or something like that. I think the other thing that's happening in the market is, so at a large level, you just had this dramatic reduction in product development cost over the last 10 years that's really made it, where 10, 15 years ago, you needed $5 million to build a product and get to market. It might take you 2 or 3 years. Then, 5 to 7 years ago, maybe it was $500,000 in 6 to 12 months. And now really it's, $50,000 to $100,000 or nothing. And a lot of products can be built very quickly. Prototypes can be built, over the weekend, and real businesses can be built in 3 to 6 months. So we're just seeing an incredible amount of efficiency in building these businesses, dramatic reduction in capital in building those businesses, but also in acquiring customers. So we've had this explosion of online channels in search and social and mobile and search and video, where it's much easier to acquire customers than ever before. There's many more customers available. That's not just domestic US or English speaking, that's now international, it's young and it's old. So a lot of the things that venture was originally built for, which were expensive, CapEx intensive businesses in product development cost and customer acquisition cost, at least for consumer and small business internet services, that's really not the case anymore. So they're very capital efficient businesses, at least in the beginning phases. But they still have this high fail rate. So we kind of are allowed to sort of do a lot more investments on a $5 million budget than we used to. Whereas we might do one $5 million investment 10 years ago and maybe 10 $500,000 investments 5 years ago. Now we can do 100 $50,000 investments. Maybe in the future we can do 1,000, $5,000 investments. And still there'll be capital that's required down the road, but those initial product de-risking, market de-risking exercises are much more efficient than they ever were. And then the other thing that's happening is that there are more acquirers out there, and there are technology companies as well as non-technology companies doing that acquiring. So there's a lot more acquisitions at a lot smaller numbers. So what's generally happening in the market is like entrepreneurs being more efficient, capital being used more efficiently, and lots of small successes, a smaller number of large wins. So that's really the trend that we're trying to, invest into and reshape what we're doing. Not just being an investor, but trying to be a resource for entrepreneurs around product and market education resources as well.
There are actually very few investors from the US in general and from Silicon Valley in particular who go outside of America or even outside of Silicon Valley to try to find investment opportunities.
That's because generally we're lazy fat asses.
I don't know why. I mean, I had this conversation last year with Tim Draper. I will have this conversation with him tomorrow again, also tomorrow.
Well, Draper's one of the few who actually has done it.
That's true. That's true, and in particular in China, in Baidu. So why is that? I mean, why aren't there more people like you traveling around the world trying to find great investment opportunities outside of Silicon Valley? I mean, there's definitely a world outside of Silicon Valley, especially in China.
Well, I hope not. I don't need the competition. I mean, I think, people tend to invest in what they know. And investors in Silicon Valley have a real, luxury of being able to invest in some of the best entrepreneurs in the world within 30 miles of Silicon Valley. So many of them never leave Sand Hill Road and wait for the entrepreneurs to come to them. And for many of them, that strategy can be successful. There's a lot of talent in Silicon Valley and a lot of talent that comes to Silicon Valley. But I think over the last 20 years, particularly in the last 5, we've seen dramatically more entrepreneurial activity in many other parts of the world. Certainly huge markets developing in other parts of the world. And I think if you really want to find value and opportunity, it's not going to be in the US over the next 20 years, 50 years as much as it is around the world. Particularly East Asia, South Asia, and Latin America are kind of the 3 core geographies where we're really trying to spend more time. Particularly Brazil and India. I just got back from a trip through Brazil and Mexico and Argentina. We did one to India last December. Asia is a little bit more complex. China in particular, there's a lot going on here that is not maybe simple for a non-native Chinese investor to figure out. But still, I think, if you're dedicated to become a student of Chinese culture and commerce, I think there's lots of opportunities in the long run here. My kids are learning Mandarin, so hopefully, even if I'm not prepared for it, maybe they are. We've done 5 investments in China in the last 3 years. I think we're taking the long view on that. We'll probably be doing 10 to 25 investments a year in Brazil and India. I think over the next few years, we might ramp that up in China if we figure out what's going on here. But I mean, it's really just investing in value. I think that there's tremendously great companies and great entrepreneurs all over the place. In Beijing, in Bangalore, in Sao Paulo, in Moscow and Eastern Europe. And I think it's rather narrow-minded and short-sighted if you're just thinking that all the talent's going to come from, Northern California. So, the globe's a big place and it's pretty interesting.
So, if I'm an entrepreneur, how can I get your attention? And how can I get your money? Because it's complicated to get your attention. And once I get your attention and your money, what can I expect from you in terms of support?
Well, I'm really pretty distracted, so it's hard to get my attention. I don't have a lot of money, and I don't really add a lot of value, so it's kind of a waste of time to even want to get money from me. I think so first of all, with the approach that we're doing, like any individual person's time on my team is not the value that you're getting. I mean, we generally don't sit on boards. Probably anyone on our investment, we have 5 people on our investment team. We're probably all going to be doing at least 20 investments a year, if not, 25 to 50. But we're trying to set up a set of scalable resources around a number of different areas. So primarily design, data, and distribution, those are our mantras. So design and UX around product, data, conversion, and metrics around the business. And then really, distribution, customer acquisition is the key, I think, to most, scalable businesses that I think even talented entrepreneurs overlook. At least in the Valley, most entrepreneurs tend to start out engineering-centric. And, while that's great, in building product, it's not always, going to be the, significant leverage or advantage in getting the business out to a larger number of customers. So, we've tried to identify a few platforms that we think are really important, at least, in U.S. and developing economies. We think, Google for search, probably Facebook and Twitter, and maybe LinkedIn for social. Probably YouTube for video, Apple and Android for mobile. So right now, those 5 or 6 platforms are the ones that we spend the most time kind of thinking about. And there's definitely more that are emerging. Zynga in gaming, Pinterest in sort of photos and shopping, Tumblr and blogs and platforms. But the platform approach and really an online distribution-focused approach to customer acquisition is really where we think a lot of value is. On the initial incubation side, we run our own incubator program in Silicon Valley, and we walk companies through a more structured approach to how they look at business model, design, and usability. So we think we invest a lot of time in the things that aren't about money. We have a mentor network of over 100 people, and half of those are in California, but half of them are all over the world. So we have 4 or 5 people here in Beijing, a few in Shanghai and Tokyo and Singapore, and then others in the rest of the US and in Europe. So the set of resources that we bring to bear are not based on my time as a board member sitting in a room with you. They're probably based on online forums and peer-based resources that we develop from over 400 or 500 company founders and a couple hundred mentors. Relationships with the platform companies that we talk about, and then we run a bunch of conferences and events on a variety of topics where we think there's thematic, industry topics that are interesting, particularly around family and education. We started a new conference around that about 2 or 3 months ago. So we do a lot of stuff, and much of it may not be the right things. We're still experimenting with our own model as well. But I'm pretty sure that the long-term competitive advantage in investing is not just having a big fund. And it's also not based on me just spending a lot of time with entrepreneurs. As much as I might think I'm helpful or thoughtful, more often than not, the entrepreneurs teach me. But I think setting up peer-based resources and networks is very helpful. And providing ways for the portfolio companies and founders and mentors to teach each other is probably more important than me teaching them. So I think it's a way of kind of reshaping what venture investments is about, and the types of resources that we spend time are probably a lot different than what venture looked like even 5-10 years ago.
So you know that at CHINICT this year we started two big initiatives towards early stage entrepreneurs. One is the organization of a CHINICT hackathon with over 100 developers in side rooms working on the hack right now, and we'll be evaluating them later on today. And the other one is the CHINICT Protégés program with different startups, pre-Series A companies that will be pitching to investors such as yourself tomorrow afternoon. Actually, I think there's one of your portfolio company among them.
Okay, well they're awesome. They should win.
Already. But there are plenty of other companies you don't have yet. So I understood that you've been investing so far in 300 companies, right?
About 250 in the first fund, and about 50 so far out of the new fund, which we just launched a few months ago.
Okay, although I really love your name, I mean 500 Startups, it's a fantastic name. But what are you going to do once you reach the 500 startups? Are you going to change your name to 5,000 startups?
I don't know, I get that question a lot. So I think when we started the fund, people thought it was just so crazy. They were like, what are you talking about, 500 startups? And so at that point they thought we were just crazy. I think after now having done 300 investments in the last couple of years, it's less crazy that we're actually doing the investments. Now they just think I'm crazy because they're not sure that strategy works. But it was sort of a fun name to come up with for a brand. I think because it was so kind of outlandish, it stuck with a lot of people. It was easy to do some branding around the number 500.
Beyond rebranding, I mean, maybe my question is a bit more serious. Let's say it's beyond the name. What's the future plan for 500 startups? I mean, do you plan to raise big money once you have a couple of very prestigious exits? Or I mean, what's?
Well, if that were to happen, yes, I think we'd probably keep going. I mean, so I think that venture has not been very innovative in the last few years. I think there's probably a few funds that I think have done the traditional model very well. I think Union Square Ventures has really done an excellent job in the more traditional model. I think Andreessen Horowitz at the large end is probably doing some interesting innovation. First Round Capital, I think, in the seed stage, and then definitely Y Combinator and Ron Conway and some other folks at incubation. And like I said, AngelList and Naval, even though they're not quite a fund, has done some amazing stuff. But in general, I think venture capital has been incredibly non-imaginative, non-innovative, and really wrong-headed in most of its approach, at least for internet services businesses. I think there's always going to be capex-intensive, capital-intensive businesses where traditional venture model is required, and particularly in later stages, I think that's definitely the case. But if you look at what's been happening to companies and their needs, they've been changing dramatically, at least for many software-based businesses over the last 2 years. And venture has not really kept up. I think Y Combinator probably has done the most interesting work in the last 5 years in changing how that model has worked. AngelList has really done a lot of great work in connecting investors and startups. So if I look at what's maybe wrong with venture right now, I think the general thing is like sample size is too small. Most VC funds are only doing 30 to 50 investments per fund. And maybe for later stage funds that model works where they're investing after traction is already established. But when fail rates in the startup business are maybe 60 to 80% or higher, and wins, large wins, let's say north of $100 million exit, are probably 5% or less of the portfolio. Like, it just does not make sense, right? If you're only getting wins 1 out of 20 times and you're only making 20 to 30 bets, your chances of having that winner are almost like 1 or 0. And so you need to engineer for a larger sample size to get a reasonable outcome when the success rates are as low as 5%. So I think the model that we're pursuing is one of doing more like 100 investments a year, about 200 investments per fund, which we think is more likely to yield us around 50 potential good bets and hopefully 10 large wins. In our math, a large win is north of $100 million. But if I really think about like where we go 5 years out, like I think venture capitalists are just overpaid and underworked. I don't think that they work very hard for their money. They sit on big funds where management fees are the primary incentive, and carry and profit is not the incentive, at least not as much. And so we have to get back to a world where, like you would incentivize a salesperson, the base salary should be enough to maybe feed you but keep you hungry, and you should be trying to make commission and on really providing value to the overall business. And for us, that means finding companies that generate profits and generate returns. So I think, would we ever run a $500 million or $1 billion fund? Yeah, we might, but it's not going to be with 10 partners investing in 30 companies. It'll probably be with 50 partners investing in about 1,000 companies or 2,000 companies. And I think that, scale, like VCs just suck at scales. VCs are hypocritical about these businesses. Like, we talk all day long about investing in scalable businesses, and we are not scaling ourselves. Right? Again, with the exception of maybe Y Combinator and a few others, like, we have not thought about how to innovate venture capital at a scale that really, is ambitious. There are thousands of entrepreneurs around the world that have great potential and great business ideas, and the market is huge. The macro picture for internet investing is absolutely astonishingly positive. Like, are there going to be less people online in 5 to 10 years? They're going to be spending less money 5 to 10 years? Is bandwidth going to be less available in 5 to 10 years? Fuck no. I mean, like, it's going to be better. It's
Hallelujah.
much better.
I was waiting for that word. Because you're famous for that word, and 2 years ago there was no fuck word. So we had plenty of fuck word this morning with Joe Hongi. Hallelujah. Thank you.
So hopefully, like, swearing on stage is not my singular contribution to the field. But I think, if we believe the macro picture for, innovation is a good one, which I do, and if we believe that capital efficiency is increasing for startups, which I do, then the logical reaction to those two things is to increase the number of investments and decrease the amount of capital per investment. Right? So 500 startups, no, hell no, we're not going to stop at 500 startups. We might do 500 investments a year, but frankly, I think that number is low. We might do 5,000 investments a year. But we have to be efficient, in how we deploy capital, and I think we need to have, investment managers who are willing to work hard, probably that are doing 20 to 50 investments per year with the expectation that, 80% of them will fail. And of the remaining ones, they'll concentrate their capital and follow on in maybe 5 to 10 of those investments.
You're basically talking about reinventing this whole industry, but how are you going to find these new type of investment professionals, because they don't exist right now, as you were saying?
Sure they do. I mean, I started off doing, when I was at Founders Fund, I'd been doing angel investing since I left PayPal, kind of as an amateur. And the first 3 or 4 years, I really didn't know what I was doing, but I still found some good companies. I found Mint.com, I found SlideShare, I found a few others. But it maybe took 3 or 4 years to kind of figure out the basics. When I started working at Founders Fund, I had a budget of about 2 or 3 million, and I made 20 investments in one group that were seed and 20 in another through the Facebook Fund. On less than $3 million, about 43 companies. Probably about 7 of those look like they're going to be long-term wins, maybe a few more. But it was very useful for me to have a limited budget to kind of do that learning on, but a very fast cycle time, right? So I was able to learn quickly on a limited budget what was working and not working, and then, you know, now with 500 Startups, we're able to scale that in follow-on investments. So I think having, you know, bringing people on who have operational experience is key, because when we're investing in early stage, we're generally investing in companies that are, you know, pre-revenue, probably pre-product market fit. There's maybe basic functional prototype, but a lot of the effort is trying to understand product risk, trying to understand market risk, potentially helping the entrepreneur in those areas. So we need to be operationally focused. We need to come from engineering backgrounds, from design backgrounds, from marketing backgrounds. We need to get our hands dirty. But we don't need to give them a lot of capital. They don't need a lot of capital in most cases. So I think if we think about like scaling up the industry, what we're really talking about is finding people with operational expertise and giving them opportunities to learn, you know, on limited budgets. You know, I can hire someone and bring them on, give them $1 million budget. They can make 20 investments. You know, if they don't completely screw that up, maybe we'll give them more the next year. But I want people who are going to be, you know, domain experts in their own area, maybe in their own geography. You know, I think we're vastly underfunded in women entrepreneurs. There's a lot of, you know, opportunities that I think are completely unexplored. You know, it's not just all like social gaming and daily deal sites. I think that's so unimaginative, and so not also what the market, you know, is asking for. There's tons of, you know, families with kids that are trying to do education-based businesses. There's tons of small businesses out there that have, you know, very significant productivity and market automation needs. There's lots of payment and financial infrastructure services still to be built. You know, but you know, we just need to work harder.
All right, so thank you very much, Dave, for sharing your insights. It was pretty provocative and much less politically correct than last time, and I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much.